Okay, the panel is live now. Hello, everyone. My name is Ranjit Venapu, co-founder of Be Waste Wise. Thank you very much for joining us on the panel today. Before we get into the panel, let me start with some housekeeping. And to ask questions and send suggestions, you can use the live chat window on our website at wastewise.be, or you can also tweet to us on Twitter at bewastewise. And let me also remind you that our upcoming panels are scheduled on the 10th and 11th of June. They are on short-lived climate pollutants and on drivers and barriers in waste management in developing countries. So you can find more information about that in our calendar page. Now, coming to the panelists, we have Dr. Linda Godfrey with us. She is from South Africa, and she is the principal researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. She has done some wonderful research on understanding and strengthening waste systems in the developing world. And we also have Maria Tsakona. She is the international solid waste consultant at D-Waste, which is also our organizing partner. She is also the curator of this theme, meaning she helped us choose topics and choose panelists. And she's one of the most passionate people we can come across in waste. So to start the panel off, Maria, would you like to start with your introduction and make a little small point about the topic?
Yes, Rajiv. First of all, I want to say hi to both of you, Linda and Rajiv. Unfortunately, Sanjay couldn't make it. Right. Rajiv, I would like to thank you for inviting us on this Be Waste Wise panel. Which is, I feel, very important when it comes to waste collection issues in developing countries. So let me let you know a few things about me. As you mentioned, I'm Maria Tsakona. I'm product manager of D-Waste. In D-Waste, we are a global firm that we are providing consultancy services on solid waste management issues. We are providing services that they are ranging from traditional consulting, that meaning drafting solid waste management plans and designing waste treatment facilities. But we are also preparing research papers, and we are organizing master classes and training. A crucial component of our work is innovation. In this content, we have already developed a number of mobile and web applications that we are using it we are using in the waste management sector to develop further the sector and to deal with crucial issues. The last thing I want to say about the waste is to refer to our main project, which is the Waste Atlas. Waste Atlas is an initiative that has been started and is being developed by D-Waste, and is strongly supported by international partners such as the International Solid Waste Association, the Waste to Energy Research Technology, SweetNet, SWAPTI, and the University of Leeds. The Waste Atlas is actually a global effort to gather, manage, and visualize global waste data on an online map. And in this effort, we are asking all the people out there to contribute. So that's a few things about what we're doing.
Thank you. Would you also like to make a point about the topic today, the waste collection systems?
Okay, I would just like briefly to state a few figures regarding the waste management sector, and more specifically waste collection systems around the world. We know that today we produce around 4 billion tons of waste, from which around 44% is municipal solid waste. We have found out that at least 30% of this global waste production is generated in countries that actually do not serve from adequate waste management systems. And we have also come up with some numbers of the people that they are not being served with collection systems. And this number is really high. We find out that around 3 billion people on our world nowadays, they are not served of any kind of waste collection system. And this number is, we are expecting this number that is going to increase in the future if we are taking into account the growth of the population, especially in the developing world. And this will create major problems, not only in the collection, on the collection systems, but generally in the waste management sector. So that's why I'm saying that this panel is dealing with a really crucial issue in the waste management sector.
So what you're saying is the waste collection, waste quantities will increase, but the infrastructure will not increase accordingly, and which might cause problems.
The thing, Rajiv, is that one big problem nowadays is urbanization. This is a global phenomenon.
Right.
And what we are expecting is that up to 2050, we're expecting that around 2/3 of the world population will be placed in urban areas. And the most of the urbanization is going to happen in the middle and low-income countries. And it is a fact that the urbanization right now is projecting 30% faster than our ability to deliver sanitation. Then this means that it's not easy for us to put in place so quick the right infrastructure and the systems and to deal with the problem. So we have to start now if we want to progress in the future define the problem.
Right. Thank you, Maria. Linda, would you like to start with your introduction and maybe tell us a little bit about what's happening in South Africa?
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much, Ranjit. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion, and it's great to meet with Maria again online. As Ranjit said, my name is Linda Godfrey. I'm a principal scientist at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa, which is very similar to the CSIR in India and the CSIRO in Australia. And we're essentially a contract research organization. We receive approximately 20% of our funding as subsidy from government to undertake directed research, and the other 80% of our research funding comes in through contract research projects with government and with industry. I've been involved in waste management research in South Africa for around about the last 15 years. My background is in geology and geohydrology, and through landfill sites came into the field of solid waste management. My particular interests now lie in waste innovation in developing countries, and we are working with our National Department of Science and Technology to actually develop a 10-year waste research, development and innovation roadmap for the country, which will guide government's investment in waste R&D over the next 10 years. My personal research interests include waste information as a behavioral change instrument and changing waste behavior in general. So that's kind of my background. In terms of the actual topic of discussion today, I think it's a very complex issue to discuss, and there are very many sort of nuances and sub-issues within this topic that one needs to consider. I think as a country as South Africa, we've been very fortunate, I think, to have actually achieved fairly good levels of domestic or municipal solid waste collection in many of our cities and towns. If you look at our large metropolitan areas between Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, our metros sit at around about 89% of households receiving a regular weekly domestic waste collection service. As one moves out into your peri-urban and rural areas, that figure obviously declines to the smaller municipalities that may be sitting at 20% of households that receive regular access to collection services. So that is the one issue in terms of how geographically collection systems vary. The other issue, though, that I think as a country we're facing is not only just regular domestic solid waste collection, but the issue of now collection of particularly recyclables. As people see value and opportunity in the recyclables, we as a country are now facing that next question in terms of what is appropriate for South Africa, with perhaps both a developed and developing economy within its borders. What is appropriate for South Africa in terms of things like source separation of recyclables? How do we implement systems that have been implemented in developed countries of curbside collection, or how do we integrate the informal sector into those separation systems? So I think there are a number of issues within this topic that one can then drill down into and discuss in more detail.
That is very interesting that you mentioned the informal sector. And I would actually like to start the discussion with a very important question. Well, let me explain the context first. And generally, when it comes to discussions on waste management in developing countries, almost all of the discussion is on the disposal technologies or the treatment technologies. Waste collection generally receives little attention. In that context, and even communities which have access to which have low budgets are often also they do not take part in the planning generally. So, they show very low percentages of collection. So, in this context, I mean, what are the options available to communities with low budgets? Who's want to go first?
Okay. The thing is that one of the solutions that the municipalities, which are normally the authorities that they are responsible for the waste collection, they can go and contract with small-scale enterprises, which are usually very adaptable, and they are being hired, and they are making the price they are offering are very low, comparing to the cost that the municipality will have to pay if they were overtaking with their own labor the collection. And normally the people that they operate in those small enterprises are people that they are very well known in their own community and are easily acceptable. So I believe this is one of the solutions that we can come up with. The municipalities can contract with small enterprises. Lida, do you have anything else in mind?
Yeah, I think that typically what we see in South Africa for municipalities that do have restricted budgets for waste management, and I absolutely agree with some of the statements that I think I read online, that waste services in municipalities typically receive small budgets. It's very low down the order of list of priorities in a municipality, and very seldom will you actually find solid waste management in sort of the top 5 priority issues of an integrated plan for a municipality.
Right.
So what we find in those municipalities is very often it's simply a case of collect, transport, and dispose. Really the basic of services. I think that there definitely is a role to play of engaging more with communities where there are issues, where budgets are perhaps not sufficient to render full services to all of the households. And I think that there needs to be more of an open discussion and dialogue between government and community in terms of solving the problems jointly. And very often we don't see this happen in terms of taking joint ownership and responsibility for solving the problem. I think that very often if government interacts with the community and the aim is to jointly solve and address the issue, and very often a solution can be found. What we find, for example, is community members with donkey or horse-drawn carts who are supporting in terms of actually collecting waste, particularly out of the very dense informal settlement areas where it's difficult for a rear-end loader or large waste vehicle to get in. We see community members with horse-drawn carriages collecting out, or with wheelbarrows actually servicing those areas and collecting the waste and then taking it to a central disposal point where the municipality can collect it. So I think that's the one point, is engagement between government and community. I think the other point also, though, is the need for engagement between the public and private sectors. What we're finding is that the private sector is very good at introducing innovations into countries and into the waste sector and into the public sector. And I think that we need to look at closer collaborations between the public and private sector in waste management, shared responsibilities and opportunities. Again, the public sector bears the costs of solid waste management, but very seldom do they actually reap the rewards in terms of the value of the resources that sit there. And so we need to look at how the private sector, who does realize those benefits, actually partners with the municipality in rendering services.
That is interesting. I will actually, Maria, were you saying something?
I was saying that another thing that it might be useful would be to enhance more the role of the informal sector of the area, since traditionally most of the collection is taking place from people working in the informal sector. And if we enhance the roles, then what we will achieve is that we are going to have a big amount of waste outside of the stream that has to be collected by the municipality. And this way we are going also to lower the costs of also the collection and also the disposal. I think this might work as well.
Countries like India and some countries in Latin America have done some wonderful job integrating the informal sector into door-to-door collection. But let me go a little bit farther. Let us explore this question a little bit further. We actually received a request from a community in India where they asked us, so the government does not do any collection here, and all the plastic and all the waste is clogging the drains. So where do they start from? I mean, there is no response from the government to their petitions. Where can they start? Can they just go to the informal sector, invite someone to start collection, or how do they start? Would one of you like to take that?
Sure. I'll jump in this one first. And I think that can be a very difficult one to do, because the first thing that springs to mind would be, well, what are the legal implications of that? What are the legal implications in terms of the informal sector or a private entrepreneur now rendering a service where, for example, in the South African situation, the municipality is constitutionally responsible to collect and dispose of residential waste. In many of our municipalities, under the municipal bylaws, they actually require that anyone rendering a service would need to register with the municipality, etc., etc. So, the first thing to address would be, well, what are the legal implications of a community now just engaging directly in, and one could say essentially bypassing the municipality or local government to do that? I think that also, the informal sector will very often cherry pick the waste products that have highest value. So we see them going in and collecting the metals, the PET and other high-value plastics, possibly glass, but it leaves all of the residual waste behind. And again, what does the community do with that residual waste?
Just Rajit, I want to mention an example from Venezuela. I think it's a similar problem they used to have in Caracas. There was the same problem. There was a lot of waste that wasn't collected, and the government didn't put any effort. So what have been done there is that the community took the responsibility, and they formed an initiative of 6 people from the municipality that they are doing the job of collection. It's very important to take part in the collection. We produce the waste, so when the government goes on with solutions, we have to be part of the solution. And these people there, that they call themselves mojileros, they actually have taken the responsibility, and they are doing that job. I mean, these people have 2 jobs: their ordinary job and waste collectors. So this is maybe an answer to their problems.
That is very inspiring. So since the community generates waste, someone from the community should come up in such situations, stand up in such situations to start the collection. Linda, were you saying something?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that one. I mean, obviously, the key thing is coming down to the issue of cost. In many instances in South Africa, where, for example, cooperatives have been established to render services, we find that the cost of rendering that service very often outweighs the income that they receive from the sale of recyclables. And the issue of essentially cost subsidy by the municipality comes into effect. So that is also something that one has to look at. I don't know what it's like in other countries in terms of, is the value of the recyclables that they're receiving out of that waste sufficient to cover the costs of the community rendering that service completely on their own? My experience is that very often it's not.
That is interesting. Now, moving to the next question. Generally, you would have seen collection systems in many countries, and they generally are designed to start with. They're designed well, but they often fail when they're implemented. Do you have any comments on what are the most common reasons for failure of these collection systems?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? I see Sanjay joined us during the course of your question.
Right, Sanjay, welcome to the panel. Sanjay, can you hear us? Sanjay, can you hear us?
Perhaps you can just repeat the question, and Sanjay can come in as we're responding to that.
Sure. I was asking what were the most common failures, reasons for failures of collection systems around the world.
Collection, you're speaking specifically to collection systems rendered by the municipality.
Right.
You want me to go on with the general comment first, and then we will see what is happening more specifically?
Sure, yeah, please go ahead.
My feeling is that, I mean, since around 60s, we have developed many models of how to design waste management systems, and we have been using a lot engineering and logistics, which are basically which are based more on environmental and economic aspects, and the economic aspects of the waste management. And this is changing the last years because today resource management and social behavior are becoming an organic part of the waste collection system and of any waste management system. And these two factors, they have to be involved from the designing part of the collection system. So we have we need a more holistic approach regarding the design and implementation of collection systems, and we need to address not only technical, economic, and environmental aspects, but we also need to address social and cultural aspects that right now are not really captured in the design and implementation of the systems. So this is generally a comment on that.
Okay, Linda.
I think three particular issues that come to mind. The first one is I think something that Maria touched on earlier, is the rapid rate of urbanization, where urban growth just can't keep up with the actual ability of municipalities to render waste collection services, and the ability to keep up with the infrastructure that's required to render those services. I think the other thing that comes to mind is the issue of town and city planning. Very often what we see, for example, informal settlements spring up, the roads are very narrow, they don't accommodate the type of vehicles and infrastructure that the municipality might have, and access into those areas is very difficult. And so one has to look at alternative methods of getting that waste out of the area. And then I think a third issue is around infrastructure maintenance and management. Municipalities, they want to buy in the best compactor rear-end loader vehicles from elsewhere in the world and implement it into the city, and it runs for a year, maybe 2 years, and then you don't have the parts and things break down, and you don't have people to service the vehicles, and you don't have the spares, and the municipality has to go out on a very lengthy tender or procurement process to get those vehicles repaired. And so in many of the municipalities, we sit with a high percentage of the fleet which is not operating at that point in time, and affects on the municipality's ability to render complete services. I think those are the three particular issues that spring to mind for me.
That is interesting. Maria?
Okay, I will agree with Linda on these 3 points, and for sure I will say that we shall stop copying high technology when it comes to collection systems from from developed countries to developing countries, because what is a good solution for the developed world doesn't mean that it's something good for the developing countries. Another point that I want to mention is that when it comes to implementation, what we have seen in developing countries is that the authorities are lacking of the capacity to implement what has been designed. And that comes when they have to make some contracts with the private sector. They don't know how then to control the private sector and their activities. And also, we have seen that when it comes to collect tariffs from the residents, they don't have put in place a sustainable system to collect the tariffs. And this is one thing from their side, and the other from the side of the residents is that they are not aware of the importance of waste collection, and most of the times they are unwilling to take part in the system, and furthermore they are unwilling to pay, either because they are poor or because they don't believe in the system. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, we have 20 minutes for the panel. Now we can, I think, talk about what we can do to improve the systems. And would one of you like to start with your suggestions for improvements of collection systems in the developing world?
If we had the answers, we'd already be doing it.
I think yes, but I can do some if I can start with some.
Sure, please go ahead, Maria.
Okay, as we mentioned, we should stop copying high-tech waste collection systems, and I think we have to allow a mix of approaches and technologies that need to be included in a well-planned overall collection system. And we need to include also, apart from the primary collection, to include sufficient secondary collection. And that means also transfer points and collection points that we have to distribute in places that will minimize the cost of collection and transfer. We need to put in place regulations and laws that will control the system. And it will be good to select when it comes to find which collection system we are going to introduce. It's good to have a selection of combinations of collection techniques. I mean, let's say that in one neighbor we can put in place door-to-door collection, and other places we can put central collection. I mean, when it comes to what kind of vehicles we are going to use, then we have to have in mind that we have to increase the productivity of the vehicles that we are using, because especially in developed countries, what is very expensive is the vehicles, not that much the cost of the labor. And that means that we have to find a way one vehicle to be able to serve more residents, and we have to find a way to improve the routes of our fleet and the frequency of our collection. What else is that this is a problem that we didn't mention, is that in many situations the containers that they have in the municipalities, although they are not enough, although they are far away from the houses. So a great issue is to find a way to put the containers as close as to the areas that they concentrate most of the population.
Right.
As Linda also mentioned, we have to enhance maintenance of the vehicles.
Right.
And another thing that we didn't mention is that we have to take care a lot of the workforce that is being involved in the waste collection, because normally they are people of low status.
Right.
They are poor, and they are not very well educated and trained.
Okay, so when it comes to infrastructure, what you're saying is, instead of just planning for the capital costs, you should also have enough financing for the maintenance to go on for some time. That is very interesting.
It is nice. I mean, and that's why the vehicles that the community has to buy, it doesn't have to be of to be very high tech. It is better to use like animal carts or small trucks. They have lower maintenance costs than using a compactor.
That's right. Actually, in an NGO, a company, actually, a social enterprise in Nigeria called Recyclers, They were on our panel last year. They actually use tricycles, but they increased their capacity by using very long baskets. I mean, they increased the height of the containers in the tricycles, thereby they actually increased the container capacity, and they've been doing some wonderful work. Linda, would you have any suggestions to start with?
Yeah, sure. I think the main one that comes to mind is the issue of partnerships for me. And that is partnerships between the municipality and the community, as I mentioned earlier, but also partnerships between the municipality and your small and medium-sized enterprises and your cooperatives. I think that the South African government in particular, as I think many countries around the world, has recognized that there's the opportunity for job creation in the waste sector. The South African waste sector, we estimate, employs around about 30,000 people in the formal waste sector and about 2 to 3 times that number in the informal sector. But government has set the target of 69,000 new jobs by 2016 and 2,600 small and medium-sized enterprises by 2016 in their national waste management strategy. So there is very much this driver of job creation and enterprise development in the waste sector. And the model of cooperatives in the waste sector is one that government is looking very closely at. And so we're currently looking at models around the world, for example, where cooperatives have been very successful and have worked, and why in areas of South Africa they are proving to be unsuccessful and not working, and what are the drivers behind that. So partnerships really are a key issue. I think very often, particularly your smaller and your rural municipalities, we realize that they can't do this on their own. They need assistance and they need support through partnerships. The other thing is the issue, and this is a very contentious one, is the issue of outsourcing of waste management services to the private sector, because immediately what springs to mind is the issue of job security and job losses by essentially contracting out services to the private sector in terms of collection. But what it does do is it creates a lot of flexibility in terms of the management of waste. Research that I did previously shows that although municipalities have an intention to do things, they are very often constrained within this very slow and bureaucratic system of government, which makes operations sometimes very cumbersome. And the issue, for example, of maintenance of vehicles, where they have to go through tender processes and it can take them 6 months to have a part on a vehicle replaced, wouldn't be an issue, for example, if it was sitting with the private sector and that private company was very closely managed. Municipalities have also told us, for example, that it's easier for them to obtain compliance with legislation when they actually outsource the waste management operations to a private company as opposed to them doing it themselves, because they can actually police the private company better and manage their compliance to legislation. But it is a very contentious topic, the issue of outsourcing, and many municipalities are just really opposed to doing it, even though there's evidence to suggest that the service can be rendered cheaper and better through that model. I don't know what other people's thoughts and opinions on that are.
That's interesting. Before we move ahead, let me check with Sanjay if he's unable to connect. Sanjay, can you hear us? No, he can't. I actually tried connecting with him via email, but we couldn't. All right. So, Linda, you were saying that the cooperatives between small-scale players and the municipality is a good way to move ahead, and maybe also outsourcing the work at lower costs. Go ahead.
I think when it comes to cooperatives, or actually any small business model, I think what we find, though, and very often why they fail, is that the municipality almost steps back and says somebody else will solve this problem for me, and they leave it completely to the small business or the cooperative to run. And again, that comes to the issue of cost. We know, for example, that the municipality is directly saving costs now with those are services that they no longer need to render themselves. There may be landfill airspace savings costs, and those savings to the municipality very often aren't transferred as benefit to the small businesses or the cooperatives. And very often that makes it financially unsustainable for the cooperative to operate. And so, again, the issue of close partnership and the municipality not losing accountability or responsibility in that process is one that really needs to be managed and well maintained.
Okay, Maria, do you have any comments on that?
I think that Linda fully covered the subject.
All right, so moving ahead. Well, I can't find an appropriate question. Looks like we've actually answered all of them.
And
I was wondering whether perhaps Sanjay could type his response and you could read it.
Right, I was actually trying to get in touch with Sanjay. Sanjay, can you hear us? Would you be able to type the question? You can use the chat button on the left side. Do you see?
At least it would be nice to hear him say hi.
Sanjay, do you see a gear icon at the top center? A gear icon for settings? All right. Would you like to type otherwise using the chat window on the left side? Top left. When you move your cursor, you should be able to see a chat bubble, which is in blue color. Sanjay, can you try talking once? We hear some voice coming from you. No. All right. All right. No, we can't hear anything. Sorry. Would you like typing on the? Use the chat window on the left side.
While Sanjay is typing, I think what springs to mind the issue of the informal sector as a very often ignored and underrepresented sector. And I think that South Africa is sitting probably about 25% recycling of municipal solid waste, and if it wasn't for the informal sector, I don't think we'd be anywhere near that figure. If you look at plastic and paper, glass, most of those recycling figures, more than 70% of that is actually being recovered by the informal sector. And we really don't appreciate, I think, the role that the informal sector plays in waste collection services.
That's interesting. Actually, there is an increasing consensus around the role of the positive role of informal sector in waste collection, and even in India, it has like really high recycling rates. Even though it's the estimates do say different numbers, but they have really high recycling rates, as good as compared to developing the high-income countries. So Sanjay is saying that the question of outsourcing and the informal sector integration is contentious in many developing countries. It is a huge sector and has been the main tool of recycling. What he's referring to is even in those communities which do not have any formal collection systems, informal systems have been, they've been in existence and they've been doing this work for quite some time.
Yeah, the whole issue of integration or formalization of the informal sector, probably about 5 years ago, we used to talk about formalizing the informal sector. I think we now realize the fact that you can't really formalize the informal sector. It's more around integrating the informal sector in.
That's right.
Again, I speak for South Africa, and that many people working in the informal sector may actually be legal immigrants into the country, where that is their only source of livelihood, and so one cannot integrate or formalize them through formal jobs. The social dynamics of the informal sector, the fact that they're their own bosses, they manage their own time, they decide how much they want to earn. I think very often one doesn't accept those or appreciate those social nuances that sit in the informal sector. But how we integrate them, I think, is key, and this speaks to the issue of innovation and the issue of source separation. How do we really maximize the role of the informal sector in source separation? We know that, for example, that once they collect, very often they have very far distances to walk to the buyback centres to then sell their materials. So the question is, how do we bring those, let's call them virtual buyback centres, closer to the informal sector? How do we bring information technology into that, and, for example, cell phone banking, so that the informal sector can collect the waste, sell it, and go back into the suburbs very quickly to recover more of the waste, as opposed to collecting for a few hours and then walking for the rest of the day. So how do we bring small vehicles perhaps into the residential areas where they can sit through a weighing system and through payments, cell phone payments to the informal sector, where there's no risk of keeping cash, for example, in the vehicle, but really to maximize the time of the informal collector, so that they can spend more of their time collecting and less of their time actually walking to sell the material. I think those are some of the key issues that we're now starting to grapple with.
That is interesting. Coming to the thought which you mentioned, which was 5 years ago, you were discussing about formalizing the informal sector. Coming to that thought, Dr. Peter Cohen, who was on our panel last year, he said that the problem with formalizing the informal sector is the nature of the informal sector, which is, again, like you mentioned, they're very independent, and so yeah, I think there is a great shift towards integrating the informal sector all around the world. And there have been some wonderful best practices. Now, Sanjay says that a big question has been on procurement on kind of vehicles. In India, the vehicles procured do not support segregated collection, like compactors, high on maintenance, and lack of garages to maintain in smaller cities. But most are willing and trying to buy it because of waste governance deficits, or say huge corruption that exists in procurement and that exists in procurement. So he's actually referring to one of the points you made earlier, both of you made earlier, about the collection systems and the costly collection systems, trucks that are put into place.
I think that very often the drive towards these bigger and costlier vehicles isn't always only from the side of government, but very often also from the side of the community. We've experienced communities saying, well, why do the wealthier suburbs have big fancy collection vehicles driving around them and we don't? We have a donkey cart and a wagon. Why are we inferior that we can't have the same level of collection service? Even though the donkey cart and the carriage might, or the wheelbarrow might actually be more appropriate, a mechanism to collect their waste. But there's this perception from the community that they are getting a second-grade service by not having the big fancy compactor vehicle.
That is very interesting. How do you address that? We have only 2 minutes to go. Quick comment on that.
I think just in terms of really being open and communicating between government and the communities, and explaining the situation, explaining the costs, explaining the urban dynamics and the town planning, which really just doesn't make it possible. That it's, I think, particularly in a country like South Africa, where it has the legacies of apartheid and differences in social situations, right. One's got to be very sensitive towards this.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Maria, we have only 1 minute. Would you like to make any concluding comments?
I want to make a comment that I'm very interested in. It has to do with the design of the system. One big problem that we are facing as engineers when it comes to design a collection system or waste management system is that in the developing world is that we normally can't find available data to start designing the system. And for us, this is a crucial point in the planning. When also it comes to go there and talk with locals, we most of the times face that not even the locals are able to provide us with sufficient data. So collecting this data and making a database, a reliable database, is very crucial for the waste management sector. And we need the people of the sector. We need to put a lot of effort in this.
That is interesting. So, Sanjay, if you could, I know you have already put in a comment. If you could type in your concluding remarks, I will read them once I do the final housekeeping before we end this panel. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. And before ending the panel, I would like to remind you that we have 2 more panels scheduled for next week, on the 10th and 11th, and they are on short-lived climate pollutants in waste management, from waste management, and the drivers and barriers to waste management in the developing countries. So before we end the panel, thank you very much, panelists, and I will read the final comments from Sanjay. There have been several examples where small pushcarts, tricycles, have better rate of collection efficiency, but they're still not promoted. Particularly for developing countries, human resource-driven collection systems are much better for higher recycling rates and livelihood generation than high-tech vehicles. With that, I think we can end the live broadcast now. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.